Hey, good morning, guys. It's Bryson with the Parker County Beef Company, and today I want to do a video about HACCP. So if you're not in the food industry, you probably have no idea what I just said, but today we're going to break it down, and this is all part of our effort to bring you guys into our operation and teach you the things that we've learned and that we're still working on learning. So I will be doing a whole video series about our HACCP plan, what we have chosen to do, and how we address some of the hazards that are inherent to processing and meat production. HACCP, HACCP stands for Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points. One common misconception that people have about meat processing or about food facilities like ours is that there is a set of rules of exactly how everything is to be done. You know, they tell you where, what, how, who has to do it, and you just go follow the rules. And that was very surprising for me when we got into this business, was just the overall lack of like, hey, do things this way. And the more you get into it, you realize that that's pretty important, the way that they set it up. So the USDA and the FSIS, which is the Food Safety Inspection Service, they provide a little bit of guidelines, but the regulations are all written in such a way that each plant can do things differently as long as they are addressing the main concerns. So when we talk through HACCP, the first part of HACCP, hazard analysis, is a pretty in-depth paperwork process. So what you do is you take your entire process from bringing cattle in to shipping box beef out, and you lay it out in a flow chart, and you say, here is exactly what we're gonna do, what we're actually gonna do in the facility. Here's what we're gonna do. And then at each of those steps, we look at three things. We look, are there any physical hazards? Are there any biological hazards? And are there any chemical hazards? So we take it from unloading the trailer. We look at, when we unload cattle off the trailer, are there any chemical hazards? Are there biological hazards? We do that all the way through. And it's about, I think we have 3 HACCP plans right now, but the average HACCP plan that we have has about 15 steps. We look at those steps and we say, hey, here's potentially all of the hazards. Now, the key part of that HACCP plan is which of those hazards are reasonably likely to occur. So we may say, hey, there's a hazard that something on the processing floor, that the machine breaks. There's hazards everywhere. There's hazards in everybody's everyday life. Now, any of those hazards, we have to have a control for. So if you identify a hazard, there's a couple ways that we can control that. For instance, we could control the hazard directly through a prerequisite program. So our prerequisite programs are things that are not control points, or critical control points, which we'll talk about later, but they're other programs that we have. For instance, we have a cold storage program. So we have a written program that says how we're going to store products, how we're going to monitor temperatures, things that the hazards of, you don't want to leave meat in 70 degrees and let stuff grow on it. So we have a cold storage program of exactly how we handle frozen and fresh product. Another way that you could control a hazard, or you could note that you're going to control a hazard, is, hey, I recognize that this is a hazard. It's going to be controlled later. Yeah, yes, it's reasonably likely that cattle will have mud on their hides, and that could be a contaminant on our slaughter floor. But due to our sanitary dressing procedures, we're not worried about that, because the way that we handle it at a different step in the process or later down the line, that hazard is mitigated. Now, hazards that can't be mitigated through a prerequisite program, or hazards that you deem are reasonably likely to occur, some of those have to be controlled through a CCP. So that's the CCP in HACCP. And that's our critical control points. Currently, we have 4 critical control points that we have to monitor and verify, and I'll talk about that here at the end of the video. But your CCP is the point in the process in which you're controlling all of those hazards that you said are reasonably likely to occur up to that point. So we currently have 4 CCPs, and I'm going to do a separate video on those on our HACCP playlist to show you guys some of the things we do. We have 4. We have zero tolerance trimming. So when that carcass comes off of the harvest floor, we perform a zero tolerance examination on that carcass. So every critical control point has critical limits. So when you say, hey, at this point, we're going to perform a zero tolerance examination, you have to define what that means and what you're actually looking for. Because if you just say, hey, we're going to look at the carcasses, that doesn't tell the employees, that doesn't tell us as the establishment owners, that doesn't tell FSIS, hey, what are we looking at? So our first one is going to be our zero tolerance examination, and that is where we are visually trimming any milk, fecal matter, or ingesta that are on that carcass. So we are looking for any contaminants from that carcass that made it onto the actual meat. We trim it all off. We perform a full visual, or in the technical term, that would be a organoleptic inspection. So that's all of your senses checking out that carcass, but we're making sure there's no contaminants on the carcass. Once we do that, we hand it off to FSIS, and they perform the same zero tolerance examination. So there's two sets of eyes when that carcass leaves the harvest floor, and two sets of eyes have said there is no visible fecal matter, ingesta, or milk on that carcass. So our second CCP is our organic acid wash, and this is a really cool time to talk about kind of the variability. There are 100 different ways you could control some of the inherent microbiological contaminants that occur in raw meat. So we talk about E. coli, Shingatoxin E. coli, or STEC, and Salmonella are just things that are naturally present on meat. So we have to address those. Now, how you address those is really up to the establishment owner, and that's one of the things that we had to learn. We thought, hey, why is nobody telling us what we need to do at this step? But it was our job to go figure out, hey, what does your proof say you can do at this step? So we reference a study out of the University of Wisconsin for our acetic acid application, but you can find studies about lactic acid. You can find combinations. I don't remember the name. They have a combo acetic acid, lactic acid, different concentrations. You can hot wash them. You can cold wash. I mean, there are 100 different ways that you can address that, and you do that using some kind of scientific proof. So we have a study that was done by the University of Wisconsin that says, hey, if you follow these parameters, again, we have critical limits for this CCP. The critical limits are we have to perform a carcass wash. So we have to have a wet dripping carcass from top to bottom with tap water. Then we perform our organic acid spray. So from top to bottom, we spray an acetic acid concentration on the carcass that has been proven to reduce the levels of those microbiological contaminants that are naturally present. So we have the critical limits there. Also, that study references, so you might think that, hey, because we're doing something at this step, like you're done with that step, it's over with. But if you have to follow all of the critical limits of your studies. So the third part of our study that we have to follow is that carcass cooler temperature. So the temperature of the room that we put that carcass into the day after we harvest it has to be, I believe, below 41 degrees by 8 a.m. the next day. So we're monitoring the wash, we're monitoring the acetic acid application, and we're monitoring the next day's carcass cooler temperature. Our third CCP is going to be our chilling CCP, and this references an extremely common document here in the processing world, which I will probably do an entire video on because it's really fascinating. And I don't remember exactly, but it's not a scientifically reviewed article, but it was presented to Congress as evidence, which lets us use it in our studies. But what that essentially shows is, and to reference the paper, it's the Bruce Tompkins paper, and what that essentially shows is that all of the bad things that happen in meat have a lot of trouble growing below 45 degrees. So that's why we use 45 degrees as a majority of the temperatures that we're looking at on our carcasses and on our chilling. So we're monitoring the carcass temperatures and ensuring that within 24 hours of slaughter, we have chilled those down to below 45 degrees, just ensuring there's no outgrowth on the carcasses. Our fourth CCP is our only CCP in our processing room, and that is our product temperature. So as we're running, we bring a carcass in, we break it down, and we're running it through saws and grinders. What we ensure is that at the last step of that process, we have not made the temperature of that product rise above 45 degrees. It usually comes out of the cooler at about 38, 39 degrees. We keep our production room sub 45 degrees. So we're really working in a cold environment, and we have a lot of success with that. But again, we're following that all the way through. Our critical limit is a product temperature below 45 degrees. We're measuring that at final packaging. There you go. Now, the other parts of a critical control point that you have to be aware of and that you have to implement are going to be your monitoring and your verification. So there are a few different ways to go about this. I'm going to do a brief explanation here, but monitoring is the ongoing I'm sure FSIS has a different definition, but the real world definition is we're monitoring this daily, or we're checking in on this process to make sure that, one, whoever's performing the process is doing it right, and two, that our critical limits are being met, and we're documenting that. So daily, we check all of our CCPs daily as we're processing and as we're harvesting. It's just the easiest way to do it. We have a big checklist, write them all down, scan them in at the end of the day. We have records that go back digitally forever. Now, on the other side, the verification is, there's kind of two parts to that. There is the direct observation. So when I'm doing a verification, say, of Aaron doing the monitoring, I am with them doing whatever the activity is. So if they're checking product temperature, I'm not the one checking the product temperature. Aaron is not the one checking the product temperature. Whoever's checking the product temperature, Aaron is monitoring that it's being done correctly. Then I am watching Aaron or whoever is monitoring to ensure that our process is working effectively. So you have effectively 3 sets of eyes when we do a verification activity, where you have someone watching someone in some of our cases, just as an extra fail-safe layer in our process. Now, the other part of a verification is going to be your records review. So once a week, I pull all of our CCPs, I pull all of our logs associated with them, and I ensure that, one, we performed all of our monitoring activities that we needed to, and two, that all of our records are accurate with the monitoring activities and that they reflect exactly what we found. So a lot to go on there. The HACCP plan is extremely overwhelming. I'm going to try to do some videos in this playlist just as we break down, and I'll probably show you guys some of our CCPs, how we do things, because I really wish this video was out there when I was trying to find it. If you're looking for great beef, ParkerCountyBeefCompany.com. Make sure you subscribe. I'm trying to do more YouTube videos. We'll see y'all next time.